on in our state capitol. Capitol Insight is developed as a public service presentation for you, and I hope if you ever have any questions or concerns, you'll call or write me, State Representative Kevin Mannix, Capitol Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. Our guest today on Capitol Insight is a gentleman who knows all about one of the primary issues that continues to face us in our society. He knows all about crime. He is our state police superintendent, a man who has risen through the ranks over the years and is well respected by law enforcement throughout the state. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce all of you to State Superintendent of Police, Reg Madsen.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity this morning.
Well, you've just reached May 1, which is your 2-year anniversary as superintendent of the state police. How's it feel?
Yes, you're right. It's been 2 years. It's went by very quickly. Actually, I'm very privileged to be superintendent of the state police. We have a lot of dedicated employees, and it's just a privilege to be the agency head of the state police.
Well, one of the things we like to do on Capitol Insight is to go back a bit and find out something about people who are in the news. The nice thing about this show is we're not stuck with the soundbite approach to public issues. And well, that's why I'd like to ask a little bit about your personal background. Where do you come from?
Well, originally, I'm from Wisconsin. I was born on the Menominee Indian Reservation in Wisconsin and moved out to Washington as a youngster, and graduated from Camas Washington High School, went in service.
Were you in the Navy, as I understand it?
Yes, United States Navy. I spent 4 years there. I graduated from Clark College in police science, a 2-year degree. Then I joined the Vancouver, Washington Police Department. I spent 4 years with that agency, 3 years as patrolman and 1 as a detective, prior to joining the state police. And I've been a member of the state police now going on 24 years.
Well, what made you decide that you wanted to go into police work?
I don't really know. You know how mothers are. My mother keeps telling me that that's something I've always wanted to do since I was a youngster. But as I grew up and grew older, it was a profession that I thought I could make a difference. I thought I could contribute, you know, to society and the citizens that we serve. So I don't know. There wasn't a magic moment. It's just been something in my mind for a long time as I grew up.
Well, as you went through the ranks with the state police, and you mentioned it's been 24 years now with the state police, what kind of changes have you seen over those years?
Well, there's been dramatic changes. I believe in the last 20 years, law enforcement and the criminal justice system has made more gains than the last 100. For instance, when I became a member of the department, my first assignment was in the crime detection laboratory in Portland. At that time, we had just 1 laboratory in the state, and that was at the University of Oregon Medical School. And there was 4 of us that did all the forensics for the state of Oregon. Now we have 7 laboratories strategically located around the state, about 30 and 40 criminalists, scientists in forensics. And probably I couldn't go back now in the crime lab and even turn on one of those pieces of equipment. The advancements are great. Some of the greatest changes, I believe a lot in philosophy, changes in law enforcement, but also in technology. I think some of the biggest breakthroughs since fingerprints became identification factor is the automatic fingerprint system that Oregon has now.
You're talking about the computerized network for identifying fingerprints? Let me catch you for a minute, though, because sure. You piqued my curiosity about the lab operations and detection of crime. I gather from what you're saying that we're now at a position that when you're at least investigating a crime after the fact, you have much better scientific tools to find out who the suspect is and then prove that suspect guilty of the crime.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these crime laboratory systems around the state, they're state police crime laboratories, but they assist all agencies, whether it's city, county, federal.
So you're not just a state police operation in the sense of just taking a state trooper's crime report and following up. You'll help any local law enforcement agency.
Absolutely, and that's really, when our department was formed in 1931, that was one of the basics of it, to support local and city and county law enforcement agencies. and be a statewide law enforcement agency. In fact, it was first resolution along that line was 1924 by then the district attorneys of the state. Of course, it was 6 years before the Department of State Police was established, but that is one of our primary goals. And we do that in the fingerprint area, identification, forensics. We've established through authorization of the legislature, and you're quite aware of that, the Missing Children's Clearinghouse. We now have the homicide file for the state. We supply local agencies with polygraph examiners, handwriting, explosive disposals. State police belong to 22 narcotic task forces in every corner of the state. So, yes, we go hand in hand with city and county law enforcement.
Well, as we talk about the crime-fighting efforts of the state police, and I would add the crime prevention efforts, because a lot of that's tied in with what you've been talking about, I try to compare that in a couple of ways. One is it occurred to me that we set up the state police in the midst of the Depression. It sounds to me like there was a political commitment at that time to quality law enforcement, even though times were tough financially.
That is absolutely right. You know, in 1931 when we were established, there were several reasons for the establishment. One, law enforcement and enforcement of the state was fragmented. There was about 7 or 8 different agencies. You had a separate agency for enforcement of fish and wildlife, a separate agency for game, a separate agency for traffic, a separate agency. So it was their intention at that time to drag it all together. But it's interesting, one of the main reasons, so of course in the late 20s, is the mobility we started getting in our state. And
so the local sheriff on horseback couldn't quite do the job anymore, or
well,
overstating it a little?
Well, it was the way the state was operated. Actually, the prohibitioners and the criminals, they established their own MO, and they call it the steal it and step on it.
This is the mode of operation, MO?
Right. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, it was, they kind of thought, and they got down to the criminal world, that the way to get away with crime was steal it and step on it. And that means commit your crime, cross the city or county line, and everything dropped off. You know, the chase dropped off, the investigation dropped off. So that's one of the reasons that the state police was formed, one of them.
Well, now, if I compare us also with, say, the California Highway Patrol, the Highway Patrol in California has a very limited jurisdiction, at least it used to. I don't know how it is now, but they were limited basically to highway patrol functions, and they were not so much a state police force when they were formed. I don't know if they're still set up that way or not.
Yes, they are. We're unlike our neighbors to the north and south, Washington and California, because they are highway patrol, and that is their primary responsibility, where Oregon has a state police operation. So we're charged with investigating criminal laws, the traffic laws, and we're very unique because we're responsible for the enforcement of fish and wildlife laws, and which is very unique in the United States. So when they formed this in '31, they wanted one central agency to take care of criminal matters and investigations in the state. So we are a lot different.
Now, I interrupted you a few minutes ago when you were starting to talk about, excuse me, the fingerprint identification system and the computers. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, you know, most people probably think when you get a fingerprint at a crime scene off a coffee table, one print, you could do something with that. And prior to this automated fingerprint system, it was absolutely worthless unless we had a suspect. If we had no suspect, you just kept it in the case file. And that was the end of it until you developed a suspect. Now with the new automation, you can take that fingerprint, run it through, and it'll do the search and identify a suspect, which was absolutely impossible before. So, and Oregon has one of the best automatic fingerprint systems in the United States. And the West Coast has done something unique that's never been done in the United States, and we've hooked up in Oregon with California, Washington, Alaska, Nevada, Idaho. So we have a tremendous database. So when we pick up a fingerprint of a burglary in Salem, we can put it in that system, and it'll check the database of all of these states, not just Oregon. So you talk about the future. I envision someday that if we pick up a print in burglary in Salem, you can run it through that system, and if he's been arrested in Vermont, you'll know it. You'll know who it is.
In other words, we'll tie into a nationwide network. And this is for identifying people based on suspicion, based on the fingerprint taken from the scene, rather than some other kind of technique.
Right. It's something that the law enforcement and the criminal justice system, up until 5-6 years ago, it was not there.
So basically, before when you lifted that print, you may have had a tool if you had a suspect to compare it to.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it was because you had to do a manual comparison and go through millions, literally millions of files if you wanted to try to run through all these prints.
Right. It was well, it was just about humanly impossible because of the number of prints. And you're right, it had to be hand searched. And in the way computers and technologies are, they can do that for you, where it's just impossible to do manually. And then you advance along that same line, and we mentioned this national computer system that I vision in, say, 10 years. I see that hooked to DNA, you know, the blood fingerprinting. I see that hooked into it, and we're advancing in photo imaging. You know, the old stereotype, here's a mug shot. Well, we're in the process of developing that system in our identification bureau where you don't take pictures. It's all computerized. And when you run up a criminal suspect, you probably have his mug shot, plus his fingerprints, plus his blood fingerprint, the DNA portion. So things are advancing so fast, and of course in all of our society, but law enforcement is one of them that's jumping by leaps and bounds.
Now, DNA is what's been called popularly the genetic fingerprint. That is, if you do a breakdown of the analysis of the body fluids or any kind of excretion from the body, you go through and look at the chromosome bar graphs based on certain electronic analysis, I suppose. And every individual, except for identical twins, apparently has a different chromosome ID within the DNA. Is that how it works?
That's pretty much it. It's an identification of your particular characteristic, what makes you a person. And you have some unique chromosome identifiers that the forensic can identify and match up. And in fact, they're establishing a national database for that right now in the FBI. So if you have a DNA program in your state, any state, that it'll be able to funnel into database, say Washington, D.C., just like they do fingerprints. So
right.
If you have a serial type rapist or a murder, or where there's body fluids in say, Vermont again, you can run through that system, and maybe the same person was arrested in Oregon. So.
Now, the people that are susceptible to being checked out through that database are basically people who have come into contact with authorities for some other reason. They've had their fingerprints taken because they were charged with a crime, or a DNA sample was taken because of some crime involvement at some point. I'm jumping from fingerprints to DNA back and forth here, but I'm trying to reassure folks that we're not talking about some national network where everybody's forced to come in and turn in fingerprints. It's for people who have either committed crimes, or say they went in to apply for a concealed handgun permit, their prints would be entered in the system, or they applied for a security-related job and they took fingerprints. Those are the kinds of folks whose ID factors are in these records, I assume.
That's right, and basically the people that have been some connection with law enforcement in a violation of a statute or a criminal law.
I'll pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and our guest today is Superintendent Reg Madsen from the Oregon State Police. I hope that if at any time you have any questions or concerns, you'll feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. We always welcome your comments and suggestions. And now back to Superintendent Madsen. It's always nice to be able to jump right back in without a very long commercial interruption or anything, but it's also nice to let folks know who we are or what we're doing. We were just talking about the state police in terms of crime investigation. Earlier, before we began this program, you mentioned to me that there have been some changes in the structure and organization of the state police over the last couple of years, as well as the last several years, even before you became superintendent. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Well, yes, the basic, I was appointed superintendent in, as you said earlier, May of '90, and I have been a state trooper for 24 years. And one of the first things I initiated is to let's stop hold things still for a minute and take a look at our organization to see if we're providing the most efficient and effective service to the people we serve, and that's the people and citizens of this state.
And this is all pre-Measure 5 even.
Yes, it was pre-Measure 5. So what we did is we stood out and looked at our agency and got everybody involved from the line trooper all the way up to the superintendent's office. And I certainly don't have any pride in authorship because all the good ideas and recommendations flowed from the bottom up. And we looked at our total organization. Can we perform better? Are we built right? Is the structure right? And after that study, we were able to, the easy part was for me. I made the decisions on how to do it. They made the recommendations, but at that time, when we got through, we had 3 phases, 1 and 2. We eliminated 55 or reduced 55 manager positions, trying to push authority down, responsibility and accountability down to its lowest possible level. And those weren't all middle or first-line supervisors. We eliminated 7 major positions, 8 captains' positions. We eliminated a total layer of management. We had sergeants, first sergeants, and lieutenants. We eliminated the first sergeant rank, trying to shore up our communications, trying to take our resources and push them where they belong, and that's direct service to the people of the state. And a lot of other things came out of that. We combined, we've been talking about crime labs and identification bureaus. Well, we had 2 separate bureaus, one for fingerprints and one for forensic science. Well, we combined those into one to reduce our administrative overhead. So now the administration is into one instead of 2 separate command structures. So we did save a lot along those lines. We established a management audit system to look at our own, to see our own system, to make sure that we are providing service. And we always kept in our minds as we go through this mission of the state police, and that's to enhance the livability and the safety of the state by serving and protecting our citizens and natural resources. So that was our main goal. But what flowed out of the bottom certainly wasn't our intentions. We were looking for efficiencies, but what flowed out of the bottom was $1 million savings a biennium in personnel costs. Plus, we feel it's streamlined our agency and pushed authority down, decision-making down, and provided a better product, which is service to the people.
So
well,
you were doing all of this just as part of a desire to make your agency more efficient. That was the original purpose, and
yes.
It sounds like you've achieved that. Now you're faced with more cuts, it sounds like.
Well, I was telling you, we were 3 phases. I got done with phase 1 and 2, and of course, the impact of Measure 5, and now we have to stop and take a breath and take a look at where we're at and where we're going with the impacts of Measure 5 on our agency, which is going to be have a very traumatic impact.
Can you give us some idea in terms of number of troopers out there? And of course, I'm going to be asking you about a ballot measure that's on the statewide ballots on May 19, but can you give us some idea of how many troopers you have out there now as opposed to, say, 2 years ago and as opposed to maybe 12 years ago?
Well, legislative authorized strength for our department for our sworn officers is 864. Now, if you want to back up 10 years ago, today the authorized strength is right around 70, 75, 73, I think is the exact answer, less than we had 10 years ago. Well, you know what's happened in the last 10 years. Miles traveled on our highways that went up 40%, registered vehicles that went up 20%, licensed drivers went up 22%, plus all the drug problems and crime problems. So in the last 10 years, our agency has actually been on the downslope while everything else has been accelerating. Now, the impact of Measure 5 in our agency, since we are primarily a general funded agency, we don't have dedicated funds for the majority of our operations. That equates to approximately $28 million cut, the 20% budget reduction that we have to submit.
Now, right now, what's happening is we're in the middle of a biennium. That is, we're not even up to July 1 of a 2-year budget period. The legislature has allocated money to all the agencies, and Governor Barbara Roberts has said, gee, next biennium we're going to see a shortfall unless we have tax reform of some kind. Therefore, I'm directing all state agencies to basically cut their budgets by 20% in their budget proposals for the next biennium. I'm sort of kind of encapsulating where we're at. So you're now facing having to slash 20% out of what was already an efficiently produced budget, and you're being told to do it in the middle of this biennium, but it's for next biennium. Is that how it's operating?
Well, I think we got several different issues, Representative Mannix. First, the governor, in State of the State address, said that we're going to reduce state government by 4,000 positions. So that's part of the equation. Plus the fact that the state is looking at this billion-dollar deficit come July 1 of '93. So it's the governor's decision to make more of a glide slope instead of coming to July 1 of '93 and say my agency have to lay off or terminate 150 troopers, say. So I don't know the full impact yet. I do know that up through September 31st or 30th of this year, our portion of the cut is 88 positions, and 79 of those are state officer positions, state trooper positions.
So in this biennium, you've got 88 positions less than, under the governor's directive. As of September 31, you'll have 88 positions less than the legislature authorized and funded for the biennium.
That's correct.
And that's going to be 79 troopers less than the legislature authorized and funded.
That's correct.
Now, I'll say this because you probably can't, but legally, the Attorney General has said that the governor can cut back positions as long as she doesn't cut back services. In addition, the Attorney General has said that, yes, she can make any kinds of cutbacks for efficiencies, but when you come to cutbacks in services, you have to get the legislature's approval. Now, I'm not going to get you into trouble by asking you a question. I'm making a statement at this time, but it surprises me that the governor thinks that somehow we can have 79 less state troopers on the road, say, come September '92, and still provide the same level of service. It doesn't sound humanly possible. Is there some humanly possible way you can provide the same level of service with 79 less troopers on the road?
Well,
or if you don't want to answer that, I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, certainly, we're not going to, at this point in time, eliminate a service, but certainly if you have 79 less troopers, you have 79 less patrols. And troopers on the road equate to so many felons being taken off the road, so many drunk drivers, so many people involved in narcotics, so much traffic enforcement against hazardous drivers. So the straight equation is less troopers on the road, less things they can do. So there is that direct equation.
Well, let's talk about a more positive aspect of, in terms of looking at where we might be in the future. On the May 19 ballot, there will be a Measure 1. It's the only statewide ballot measure. And under Measure 1, we have some provisions that would allow the Highway Trust Fund in the future to be used for patrolling highways. I'd like your reaction, at least in terms of providing us with some information as to what has led to the development of Measure 1 and why it's on the ballot.
Measure 1, you're certainly aware of that. You were the chief sponsor of that piece of legislation. Would return the state police back into the Highway Trust Fund, and like it was prior to 1980. Prior to 1980, our patrol part of our department, not the whole department, but our patrol traffic enforcement section was funded out of the highway fund. It was a dedicated funding source. And what Measure 1 would do is put us back into that funding source, build some stability into our traffic safety programs, and take a more proactive approach to it. It does require a change of the Constitution, which occurred in 79 to take us out. So what the measure does is just put us back into our funding base, what we had prior to 1980.
I'll mention to our audience that you're with us on Capitol Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, and our guest today is Superintendent of State Police Reg Madsen. If at any times you have any questions or concerns or comments, please feel free to write to me at Capitol Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon 97310. We just have a few minutes left, and so I'll return now to our guest, Superintendent Madsen. We were talking about Measure 1, and the potential impact for the state police. Now, as I understood it, perhaps for about 40 years up to 1980, throughout the existence of the state police, apparently, they were funded out of the Highway Trust Fund. But I might want to explain for our audience, the Highway Trust Fund is gas taxes and motor vehicle registration fees. All those monies go into the Highway Trust Fund, and under the Constitution, they can only be used for certain purposes, building, maintaining and repairing roads, basically. And now Measure 1 proposes to say that they can also be used for policing highways, a provision that used to be in the Constitution but was taken out. If we were able to come up with a stable funding source through the Highway Trust Fund, what kind of changes would you envision for the state police? Now I'm saying, let's forget about the budget for a minute. Let's talk about a stable funding source. What kind of changes would you like to see in the state police?
Well, if we're talking traffic enforcement, number one, when you get a stabilized funding source, you can be more proactive. And I don't believe that traffic enforcement is at a level of awareness it should be. You know, what takes place on our highways every year is, to me, unacceptable. And we need to be more proactive. We know what causes fatalities. We know what causes injury, accidents. And we kill 500 people a year on our highways. And if that's down 50 from last year, sometimes people think that's been a successful year. But we've still killed 500 people. And lost in this whole shuffle is the 35,000 people we injure every year in traffic accidents. And sometimes the misery and pain for the person and family is just tremendous. So I don't like those odds for my family, and I'm sure you don't. So there's things we can do about traffic safety. There's things we can be proactive. Number one in all of this is we know what causes them. We know the high speeder, the reckless driving, and the drunk driver. And a lot of our traffic laws, let's face it, the likelihood of people obeying a lot of those is the likelihood they're going to get caught. And we've all been there. We drive down the road and we're maybe daydreaming and we come up on a marked police car. What happens?
Look at your speedometer and
Boy,
slow down.
People, you know, they can become aware. If they're following too close, they back off, they look at their speedometer, and sometimes they even start using their signals. So there's things we can do, and I think the tragic loss on our highways is, it has to be brought to a higher level of awareness. You know, the last 10 years, traffic accidents have cost citizens of Oregon one way or another $8 billion. Can you imagine that? $8 billion. They say when everything is done through the whole process, and this is from the National Traffic Institute, the fatality somewhere along the line to somebody costs about $1.5 million. You know, I mean, that's the whole injury accidents is 11,000.
So if you had your druthers as far as the future goes, you'd like, and if you had a stable funding source, you'd like to see more troopers on the road.
I certainly would. You know, I mean, there's one thing, tragedies going on in our society that we know why it occurs and we know how to take some action on it.
We know how to stop it. The question
Yes.
is, are we going to do it?
Yes.
All right. Well, with that challenge, I'm going to thank you for joining us today on Capital Insight. I think it's a challenge for our audience to consider, too. And I thank our audience for joining us. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix. Our guest has been Superintendent of State Police Reg Madsen, and you've been with us on Capital Insight. Thanks again for joining us. Paid for and authorized by Citizens for Mannix, 2003 State Street, Salem, Oregon, 97301.